If you've been watching me for the last couple years, you'd know I'm a pretty big fan of The Last of Us. It's been one of my all-time favorite games since I got the PS4 edition for Christmas in 2014. Despite really not taking to the sequel when it first came out, I later replayed it and decided I really loved the experience. I did deep dives into both games back in 2023 and was pretty proud of the results. I even combined portions from those videos to make my Joel Was Right video, which became my 7th video to reach 1 million views, so I thank everyone who watched it for that. I was also a pretty big fan of the first season of The Last of Us when it came out in 2023. I watched it through twice and haven't really seen it since, but it still sticks in my mind pretty vividly. It was one of the best game adaptations of all time. It took what worked about the original game and changed it up in all the right ways to make for compelling event television. And it really was an event. I was talking about my favorite game nearly daily with people who had never played it and don't even play video games. It was easily the show of the year for me. But I wasn't sure what to expect with Season 2 of The Last of Us. The discourse surrounding the game was venomous enough, so I was almost not looking forward to having to live through it a second time. Especially since one of the big draws of the first season was that it was the new Pedro Pascal action show, since he's one of the biggest stars of the current decade. Well deserved, I might add. I think he's a class act, but since I knew he wasn't going to be in it for much of the season, and I knew they were splitting the game into multiple seasons instead of just ordering more episodes, I thought this might have some mixed results. But I still believed I was going to love it because the creative team that made Season 1 was still behind Season 2. Speaking as a fan of The Last of Us 2, though, I came away from Season 2 not really vibing with it for much of the runtime. I didn't think it was bad, but my thoughts that this season might struggle to hold people's attention kinda came true, as the discourse wasn't even that vicious. It just seemed like it wasn't getting talked about much, even amongst the people who don't play games that I just said loved Season 1. The Last of Us 1 just has a more broadly appealing story than 2. But now that the season is over, though, I'm gonna give my thoughts on the things I liked and didn't like from each episode. Before the episode list got announced, I actually thought Joel was gonna die in episode 1, but was pleasantly surprised that the episode instead focuses on building up intrigue. Joel dying at the hands of mysterious people who came from places unknown at the start of the game was a big deal, but that cat has been out of the bag for so many years that just opening on Abby and friends, showing them as former Fireflies out for revenge, builds up suspense, I thought, since you don't really know when that other shoe is gonna drop. But then most of the episode is spent on how peaceful life in Jackson is as you get reintroduced to the older Ellie and the family community man Joel. Pedro Pascal really just nailing this sense of humor for him that wasn't really there in the games.
See, we got this dial. Called the constructometer.
Joel.
The more you turn it, the faster we go.
I also thought that Tommy and Maria having a child added an interesting new element to the story, since I imagine Tommy leaving for Seattle while he has a 5-year-old at home is going to contribute a lot to the divorce later on. I liked this episode. It casually introduces that Joel and Ellie are on the outs right now, and that clearly it's for a reason beyond usual teen angst, despite what he might say to Gail, the town therapist, who hates Joel for how he killed her husband, Eugene. That'll get casuals to start guessing, but fans to also start running wild with theories, since we already knew that Eugene was once a Firefly, like maybe he knew too much and Joel killed him, and that's how Ellie found out about the lie and all that. I also liked how episode 1 gave Dina a one-on-one relationship with Joel, where she's also trying to get Ellie and Joel to talk again. It's nice because it gives her more personal motivation to help Ellie track Abby down than just supporting her girlfriend. The introduction of the Stalker class of infected was also well done too. I knew this season wanted to include more action and infected since they have the budget to do so now, and they made these guys seem decently threatening on screen, and that was great. I was surprised when they included the party scene that was a flashback placed towards the end of the game in the first episode, but I was also fine with that since it furthers the drama and intrigue new viewers will have seeing Ellie and Joel be so distant from one another. And in addition to that, you start wondering, what about the porch scene? Here, they just show Ellie stop by and walk past him, which I knew would seem heartbreaking for when Joel dies, as new viewers might think she had the chance to talk to him here but didn't take it. My already knowing that later they would cut back and show us what happened. So episode 1 I was down with. It was a lot of build-up, but I knew what was coming in episode 2 and was definitely ready for it. Episode 2 was absolutely epic. I had high expectations for this when I found out that the director of this episode was the same as Connor's wedding from the last season of Succession, which is a great choice for this episode. If you know, you know. But I thought this episode had a lot of great moments. They said they wanted to do more infected, and the big Jackson battle put the infected horde scene from season 1 to shame. It showed how well-oiled of a machine Jackson is that they have a full system of dealing with hordes, but even then, they can still be somewhat overrun and have a lot of people die as a result. I thought it was an incredible action scene and was a worthy inclusion to the story. I figured it would also make Tommy's leaving for Seattle more dramatic since the town was crippled and already lost Joel and couldn't afford to lose Tommy, but he leaves anyway. Also contributing to Tommy's inevitable guilt since he wasn't there when Joel died in this version of the story. But speaking of which, that is obviously the most important element of this episode, and I thought it had a lot of improvements over the original scene. I was never bothered by the Joel and Tommy give out their names issue many have had with the original scene, but I can't deny this version's better. It's Joel and Dina stuck in the storm on patrol, and after Joel rescues Abby, it's Dina who casually says Joel's name. She'd have no reason to think that was to be avoided, especially in a moment of crisis. And then, while it was possible for Abby and friends to knock out Tommy and then kill Joel, I thought it was more believable for them to subdue Dina the way that they did. And that would also contribute to her own personal vendetta against these people that I was talking about in episode 1. I did overall like the original death scene more, though. This scene sees Abby explain her motivations to Joel in detail, which I was fine with, but as I'll get back to later, exposition dialogue was something I didn't really like about this season. I thought it was cooler in the game how Abby probably did have a giant speech ready for Joel, but he knocked the wind right out of her sails by saying this.
Why don't you say whatever speech you got rehearsed? Get this over with.
He kinda does that when he says this after the speech.
I have waited
Just shut the fuck up and do it already.
But I liked the original dialogue better. I also just like Abby's motivations being a mystery better as well. Part of the change is because it's a TV show and not a game, but I don't feel like Joel is the type to give a shit why he's being killed. He knows who he is and that his actions would catch up to him eventually. But I guess TV Joel is the kind of character to be like, but I saved your life more than game Joel ever was. Despite all that, I did think the death scene was well done. I knew it was going to happen, and yet I still somehow coped with myself, thinking maybe he'll get out of it this time, but no. Which is how casuals seem to think. Like, my uncle told me he just assumed Joel would find a way out of it, since we all assume the main characters have plot armor, but he was pretty upset about it in a bad way. I just found it gut-wrenching all over again to see him die like this, and for Ellie to crawl up next to him in what she assumes were her final moments, only to be saved as the Ashley Johnson cover of the song Through the Valley concludes the episode. By the end of this one, I was pretty excited for the rest of the season because I thought this was an all-time great episode of the show. Episode 3 was when I started feeling different about the season, though. On the whole, I thought the episode was fine. Ellie's exploration of her house now that Joel is dead is just as hard-hitting in the show as it was in the game. And I also liked how real it felt when Ellie wakes up and remembers everything that happened, but then a lot of the rest of it had me feeling mixed. I just thought the episode was too long, and has too much dialogue explaining characters' motivations. Ellie and Dina leave for Seattle at the very end of the hour-long episode. After Joel died in the game, you only get the scenes you needed, like Ellie feeling alone, arguing with Tommy about going, and the part with the house, and then the mission to go to Seattle because Tommy already went. That was it, and then you're in the main game. In the show, 3 months have passed and life has gone on while the town rebuilds from the Horde attack. Ellie tries convincing the council to spare manpower to go after Abby, but is denied and she goes herself. When you're watching a season of TV week by week, one that already has a small number of episodes anyway, it just feels odd that an entire hour is spent building up to the revenge mission, which is what the audience is hungering for, and then you have to wait another week for the story to actually get going. But once you actually arrive at episode 4, it's still moving at a somewhat glacial pace. The Last of Us 2 has a 2-hour prologue, and then you're put right in Seattle day 1 as Ellie, but most of that time in the game is getting to explore this open area to your heart's content. You can find a lot of fun gameplay here that's pretty much all optional, but there isn't as much story at this point in the game. Which is something I realized while watching this season, was that Ellie's story was mostly carried by the game being a really fun stealth action game, because the plot is looking around for Abby and crew while Ellie gets closer to Dina. When you take the gameplay out of it, it doesn't really make for a super thrilling episode. It was this episode where I started to check my watch and be like, is this episode almost over? Which made me sad to think. One thing episode 4 had to focus on was Ellie's relationship with Dina, but I have some thoughts. In episode 2, I was cautiously fine with them changing the weed scene. What used to be Ellie and Dina bonding became Ellie and Jesse exploring while Dina was with Joel. I wasn't sure where they were going with that, since obviously the two would need to share screen time together at some point, but then I thought Dina being with Joel added a lot, so I was willing to look past it. But Ellie and Dina sharing a lot of screen time before Joel died made it easier to just jump into the gameplay in Seattle because their relationship already had legs to stand on. But then because of the way they changed it up, episode 4 needs to spend a lot of time on it, when episode 3 already slowed the pace down by a lot. So the extra scenes that didn't add a lot to episode 3 is making episode 4 feel even slower by comparison because you really just want to get to the action now. I liked this version of Dina more than the original. I thought her personality was more entertaining to watch in this version. But I do think the relationship she has with Ellie in this show has one consistent element that made me prefer the original, which is the way Ellie is very infantilized by a lot of characters around her. Regularly treated like some kind of idiot or baby that needs to be taken care of or talked down from bad ideas by Dina and Jesse. In the game, I feel like Ellie's relationship with Dina and her friendship with Jesse were more on equal footing, where they all respected each other. When now you have this version of Ellie who's just so obviously not good at any kind of logistics type stuff. When in the game, Ellie was perfectly capable of handling herself, but just had friends along for the ride. So much so that she calls Dina a burden when she finds out about the pregnancy. That scene showed us how dark Ellie was getting. Those were her first words when finding out her girlfriend was going to have a baby. when the TV version is more excited about it, which kind of made it feel like we were losing the plot a little bit. I liked how accurate the set design was in episode 4 and thought the ending action scene was well done, but it did make me wish I was playing it instead, as the story also doesn't use all the potential for drama it could have. For example, in the game, part of the plot is that Ellie and Dina are sent to Seattle by Maria to bring Tommy back, but when Dina is pregnant, Ellie has a conflict that Dina needs to go home, but Tommy is still out there, and deep down she knows Abby is too and wants to stay and find Tommy, but more importantly, find Abby. I thought that was more interesting than this version where Ellie and Dina secretly go to Seattle to find Abby and just stay despite the pregnancy, only to be stumbled upon by Jesse in episode 5, who says he and Tommy came to find them. At the end of the day, it's technically the same story, but these small detail changes make the plot less compelling in my eyes. When the first season made changes that I thought were improvements or just were differences that worked for what they were, compared to here where I thought there were a lot more downgrades. Downgrades that are partially because of how the adaptation is being structured and partially because of how the show is written. I'm just picturing the casual audience, and I just wonder how the multi-season split is going to land for them. At least with a game, you just play through it, but here you get some slow episodes, and then better ones, and then it ends on a cliffhanger, and then you wait a year or more to see the Abby story, and now Craig Mazin is saying that they might need a season 4 to tell the full story, which really seems weird to me. I think you could easily do the Abby story and the epilogue in 9 episodes or so. But as it stands, you get parts in episode 5 where Isaac is introduced as the leader of the WLF and his fighting the Seraphites, and you just hope people remember who that even is and what's going on between these factions by the time season 3 comes out, whenever that is. Season 2 also just has a lot of exposition. I really noticed that at the end of episode 5. I enjoyed this episode. Dramaturgically speaking, I thought the introduction of spores was well handled. The world building in this show usually is. But most importantly, I loved the ending where Ellie goes after Nora. The scene is very similar to the game, and rightfully so. I know many were worried Bella Ramsey wouldn't have the chops to be a scary killer, but holy shit, if this kid had me dead to rights and looked at me like that, I'd be pretty scared, yeah. The scene was brutal, and it looked like the game came to life, which is what you'd want. However, the main change is that Nora explains to Ellie why Abby killed Joel, and Ellie says she knows who these people are and doesn't care. Once more, the audience is being spoon-fed Abby's side of the story while also not seeing her. The advantage the game got by never showing Abby and learning nothing about her until the story switches to her is that you and Ellie can project whatever you want onto Abby. You later have to contend with the context of her life before playing the theater fight. So they're keeping Abby off screen in season 2 while also making sure you know what she's about. I don't know, it just seems like a strange middle ground, especially since part of the conflict between Ellie and Abby is that they don't even know anything about each other. They're just fighting because of what they both project onto the other one. But then episode 6 was pretty great. To my surprise, they decided to just take all the original game's flashback content and put it in the same episode, while removing the need for gameplay, so there's no trek through a hotel because it's a TV show and not an action game. These flashbacks are some of the best scenes in the game, so they hold up pretty well when done in the TV version. The Future Days guitar bit is fantastic, the scene from the game actually being the inspiration for my learning how to play guitar at all. So I loved that. The museum scene is as cute as ever, and the new stuff added with Ellie's ex-girlfriend Kat, who was only mentioned in Ellie's diary in the game, was all great stuff. Joel had never made it to the teenage parent dynamic with Sarah, and it's a new set of challenges for him, even removed from the lie he told that hangs over their relationship. But I will say, pacing the flashbacks throughout Ellie's Seattle campaign worked well in the game because each one left you with a different idea of how Joel and Ellie's relationship was by the time he died, all the way down to the final scene giving you true clarity on what was going on. I love that element of the game. The show doesn't really do that, instead cramming everything into one episode. I guess this isn't a change that's terrible, just not how I'd have done it. I would have paced it more like the game for the reason I just gave. But I love the scenes in the episode nevertheless, especially the cold open with Joel's father, played by Tony Dalton. The parent-child themes run through the Last of Us series, and bringing it back to show Joel's father and how he was and how that affects Joel and his parenting was really emotional. How Joel's father used violence when he didn't know what else to do because that was all he knew. But how the adults in his life abused him in ways Joel couldn't even imagine. Now Joel uses violence to protect Ellie because he loves her. I don't know, Joel's father saying he hopes he does better than him at the beginning, and Joel saying he hopes Ellie does better than him got me in the feels. But speaking of that scene, I did like the porch scene in the original game better. First, because it was the ending, as I went into a second ago, but also because it was a quieter scene, which made it feel more emotional for me. Here, Pedro and Bella are giving everything they have to this scene, and it is emotional stuff. I did just like the way it was presented before better. Especially since this scene crams in both Ellie confirming the lie and the points from the original scene, because this part where she finds out the truth was removed. I think getting rid of Ellie going back to Seattle on her own to learn the truth was definitely an improvement, And I think Ellie confirming the lie by watching Joel do it to Gale after he killed Eugene was also an improvement. But then I would have followed the Gale scene with the lie reveal, and that would have led to them not talking, and then you rewatch the party scene, and then the porch scene can play out like it did in the original game. Then it would be basically perfect for me. If you don't mind how expository the dialogue is in this. I mean, Joel outright says he loves Ellie here, when the game versions never said those words to each other. You just understood that they loved each other but were too closed off to ever utter the words. Game Joel was just a man of few words, but those words all packed a punch, and I think that's part of why I liked that porch scene better in the original, because if Game Joel is going to start crying, you know it's a heavy scene. But again, I still thought the episode was great. And it all led to the final episode. My thoughts on this season were pretty much made up before we got to this point, but still the last episode's worth discussing. In the aftermath of the Nora confrontation, the expository writing comes out in full force as Ellie explains that maybe Nora got what she deserved, but maybe she didn't, and then explains how she kept hitting her over and over and how it wasn't even hard for her, it was easy. Craig Mazin from the very beginning has had this view of Ellie as a person who's activated by violence, Ellie virtually spelling that out for us in this scene. But I just never saw the game Ellie like that. I saw her as a good kid and good person who was really just scared and afraid of being left alone and was also thrust into violent situations a lot, contributing to her PTSD and depression. In fact, that's what the original scene in the game was telling you. It's the exact opposite. Ellie is upset at what she did to Nora. From then on, I thought the last episode suffered from the thing that hurt many of these episodes, that it was a lot of build-up and we never got a lot of payoff. Ellie and Jesse's scenes together were good. Some might not like that Jesse is less of a best friend in this one and is more adversarial towards Ellie's goals, but I thought it was believable. Especially since all he wants is to get Dina and the baby back to Jackson, but to do that they need to find Tommy while Ellie decides Abby's more important. The dramatic irony of his talking about going home really hit me since I obviously knew he was going to die in this episode. Another thing we see here is Isaac and the rest of the WLF crew loading the ships to go to the Seraphite Island, as seen in Abby Day 3, and I thought that was smart connecting tissue. However, we then get a totally random scene of Ellie getting washed up on the island while on her way to the aquarium. It's like a minute long where Ellie's captured by some Seraphites and is about to be killed, but they let her go when they discover the wolf attack, and then she gets back to what she was doing. I don't know, I just thought that scene was a big ball of nothing. I thought the scene where Ellie killed Mel and Owen was also a good one, especially with how much more dramatic they made the reveal of Mel being pregnant compared to the game. Though later she says she didn't mean to kill either of them, which I thought was odd since, like I just said, this Ellie likes hurting people, especially these people, I thought. The season ended basically how I expected, that Abby would show up at the theater, they'd cut to black, and it would be over. Though in the show, they cut to Abby in the stadium on day 1 as a tease for the next season, but I have a hard time picturing a casual TV fan being like, oh my god, now we get to see the story from Abby's side, so hyped. I mean, she's barely been in it and is set up as the villain. Having said that, I'm actually pretty excited to see if Abby's story's done well or not. I already liked it, and I think the actors playing Abby and friends are really good, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. But that doesn't change the fact that I feel like Season 2 had a lot of misses. I've gone into it already, so I don't want to recap. I'm just saying that I think splitting this game into multiple seasons felt like a mistake. I don't know if the Ellie Day 3 cliffhanger going to Abby Day 1 is exciting enough to wait like a year or more for. I just think there should have been a longer episode order from HBO. Like, look at Andor on Disney+. Both seasons are 12 episodes long. I think you could tell the story of The Last of Us 2 in that time if you focus on the most important elements and drama. But Season 2 of The Last of Us feels both too slow for half of it and too rushed for other parts. Did I think it was bad TV? Definitely not. It's certainly watchable, but not the bar of quality I was expecting. Season 1 is a show I wouldn't mind watching again, but for half of these episodes I can't imagine myself being that excited to watch it again. But that's pretty much all I have to say on the season for now. The story is yet to wrap up, so I can't say for certain how I feel about this adaptation, but so far, I just didn't like it as much as I hoped. But that's about all the time we have for today, so it's time to bring the video to a close. If you liked Season 2, or if you didn't, or had some thoughts in between, write it down below. Otherwise, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.